Good morning. I am Alys Mendus, a final year PhD student from the University of Hull in the UK, on a scholarship in freedom to learn. The ideal school. What do you mean when you say the ideal school? I know what you're all thinking, as it was Jane Speedy who sat there stuck throughout the whole presentation. What is Alys on about when she says the ideal school? Isn't that an oxymoron? And so it is. And that is why this is more a presentation on who the fuck is Alys-we, about the multiplicities of Alys that make up me. I will lower my shields and invite you to join me to peer through the looking glass at Alys. Today, I will introduce you to snapshots from the rhizome, at the interconnected web of my thoughts, allowing you to meet 4 nodal Alyses. Alys, the edge dweller, in a flower garland. Alys, the school tourist, in an Australian stockman's cap. Alys, the educator, in a 1920s hat. And Alys, the van-dwelling PhD student with a flower in her hair. Although many of these pieces began being written in one voice of Alys, they are all iteratively related, so that many voices of Alys can be heard. For they are all part of the rhizomatic nomadology of my life, through school tourism as method, searching for the ideal school around the world, showing glimpses into the complex web of my assemblage, ethnography, or my autoethnographic we. And it's through the lens of bad Alys, towards a queering of the Alys-we, that I offer this rhizomatic storytelling of different possibilities, aiming that, with my embodiment of these stories, can act as a utopian performative of hope towards societal change. But what is the queering of bad Alys? And who is bad Alys? Bad Alys follows patterns in my life where I've chosen to step outside of the normative way of being. As a child, this covers my exploration of my other identity as Julius, a Roman British boy from Vindolanda on Hadrian's Wall. Julius followed my parents home from a visit, aged 6, and slept on the floor of his sister's bedroom for weeks. He makes a bullet to wear and has Alys cut off her long hair and declare that she wants to be, is, a boy. However, I see queering, like Mendus, as not necessarily connected to gender identity or the fluidity of that, but also an exploration of the other spaces, the gaps that this performative autoethnographic piece aims to give a voice. The voice of bad Alys will be omnipresent throughout the rhizome. But what is a school tourist? School tourism as method allows me to understand my embodied journey, using Crouch's idea that tourism is a seductive encounter, and Bauman's concept that tourists are consumers has helped me position my work. I visit schools and observe. Sometimes I teach or share a story of other schools I've visited, but mostly I consume. I take photos, think and reflect on what I've, in my opinion, observed, and add those thoughts and assumptions to my bag of tricks of knowledge about places educating differently. A mention of another school to visit, and off the tourist takes on another journey. We live in a van. My home is constantly moving. My life is also that of a vagabond, which Bauman describes as they won't stay in one place for long. And we don't. But this is not fundamentally about privilege, to pick and choose as a vagabond school tourist. I may be on a low income, but I'm not destitute or homeless, just choosing at present to live an itinerant life. I know it means I have more disposable income and freedom than renting a physically fixed room in a house. The van dweller, as the journeywoman, vagabond, school tourist. And the audience should not feel sorry for the van dweller, as this is an activist choice, a place of privilege to resist the normativity of fixed home dwelling. Other theorists have seen Bauman's vagabond or tourist as the nomad, from Braidotti or Deleuze, the journey of a school tourist. The vagabond, the tourist, the nomad is not linear. It twists and turns, sometimes returning to a home location and other times not. An unsettled dialogue between an ever-changing peripheral and its centre. Rhizomatic theory influences the nomadology of school tourism as it aims to step away from using the habit of using I. For example, in the chapter The Rhizome, Deleuze and Guattari suggested to reach not the point where one no longer says I, but the point where it is no longer of any importance whether one says I. The rhizomatic movements between the subjects that visit schools, the multiplicities of the subjects themselves, the physical and intellectual schools, etc., are all intra-acting with each other. From Barad, there is no singular I. But school tourism as method differs here from the nomadism argued by Braidotti and Baumann. Braidotti argues that not all nomads are world travellers. Some of the greatest trips can take place without physically moving from one's habitat. Consciousness raising and the subversion of set conventions define the nomadic state, not the literal act of travelling. Where I argue that it is the literal act of travelling that is essential for school tourism, and as it is an embodied spatial practice. I recognise that it is possible to use the internet, to visit school websites, watch documentaries on particular schools, or read articles to be visiting the schools abstractly. However, this is not school tourism, as it misses the emotional aspect of the practice from Zamblayas. It is also the visit itself, which could be seen as a nodal point, as Gale explains, where the latencies of emergence become manifest in nodal points in the flows of possibilities of each rhizomatic encounter. Let us hear from Alys, the school tourist, talking about the edge-ucational gems. It took a while to come to me, for a moment of clarity in the ever-spinning rhizome of my life, to realise that no one school exists in this moment that is my ideal school. I had seen ideal as achievable, realistic, as a cup half full kind of person, full of blocks, concepts of hope. Not like the inaccessible Foucaultian utopia, the ideal school was out there somewhere. My school tourism has taken me to over 150 schools in 19 countries, and yet I am left with a bitter taste in my mouth as I cannot find my ideal. Feeling sad at being accused of being negative about society, realising that the ideal cannot exist in this neoliberal world. Then I remember who I am. Some have described me as a free spirit, and others as a coyote. So by cartwheeling these concepts of contempt, I can be smiling. Smiling as I begin to see the hidden gems sparkle. There are hints at the possibility of change in all but the darkest examples of education. My edge-ucation. My edge-ucation of hope. Like a lot of my research, I see the spectrum of queer theory making sense here. The I has no story of its own that is not a story of relations, says Butler. A need for levels of the individual with access to community and collective learning, moving away from comparison, grading and hierarchy. It again moves away from the binary. The search for the ideal school is a long way away from the binary of which is better, alternative education or mainstream. Thinking I am looking for my gems from McClure in the visits gives me hope. And realising these gems are my education fills me with delight. The dialogue can continue. These schools I visit around the world may, to varying degrees, aim to educate differently, but they are pulled and pushed by the reality of neoliberalism. For example, Kumwara in Australia excited me as its gems really glowed, showing that even with the constraints of a set curriculum, self-autonomous learning is possible. Or the Home Education Support Centre Floresta in Lisbon in Portugal, with its learning app, is meeting the curriculum in a modern, autonomous way. And other places are out there, glowing with gems, filling this educational space. And the search for the ideal has given me some stories of hope, but still under the shadow of now. Let us continue with Alys, the van-dwelling PhD student. There are some days in the PhD life when it just makes sense. I'm in the back of our van, perched on the bed, snuggled up against some sheepskins, my bare knees squeezed under a beautiful piece of reclaimed oak that is my desk. My laptop is open and a pile of books are beside me. The cars are rushing by on the road outside, but I am stopped here. My man is gently breathing, snoring slightly as he sleeps behind me. My coffee waits in its tiny little enamel cup, waiting to be cool enough to drink, and I lick the last remnants of croissant and homemade strawberry jam from my lips and smile. Outside, the sun is dappling through the trees in a sheltered spot we found to park our van last night, and my heart beats faster as I remember why we chose to stop here. We're in Clay Hill in Wiltshire, and a few hundred metres up the track is a large field of wheat with the most fabulous crop circle. I'd never been to a crop circle before yesterday, although I dreamed of the day, and yes, I had been on cropcircles.com to follow the patterns over the years. But yesterday, it all changed. We walked up the hill first, not wanting to spoil our surprise with sideways glances back to the circle, and it was worth the effort to stand and look down with that bird's eye view at the sunflower shape cut deep in the wheat below. We knew we wanted to go to it. It felt like an impulse pulling our beings into the centre, so we found a gap in the fence and followed the farmer's tractor cuts in the wheat all the way to the middle. Boz was taking a video as we approached the centre and watching back and hearing the visible intake of air as we saw how the sheaves were lying in different ways and layers and the patterns. We knew we were somewhere special. I lay on the ground and looked up at the blue summery sky and the puffy clouds and wondered, how had this happened? I smiled at Boz behind the video camera and said my classic line, "This is essential for the PhD," which I often say when life is amazing. And then this morning, at first light, we crept back with the hope of the new day hanging over the field and the red checkers warning clouds. We lay together in the middle of that crop circle, celebrating our love for each other and the transformative energy of the unknown. And now let us meet Alys, the edge dweller exploring privilege. I'm going to tell you a story about privilege. I'm at the Dark Mountain Weekend, an event that was held in the southwest of England last September. I'm in the hall and about to listen to a well-respected storyteller, Martin Shaw. From my viewpoint, on a cushion on the floor, I look up in awe at Martin Shaw. The thought that I am hero worshipping flits across my mind, and I think about gender, status and hierarchy and realise, yes, it is another ohm up there. An ohm is my term of 2016, an old white man. Yet it is seemingly ageist and sexist. It is intimately connected to assumptions of privilege and entitlement and theoretically linked to Braidotti's work on phallocentrism. It is a thing that has come into my life as I explore myself as an edge dweller, someone interested in alternative ways of living and educating that have come across this hierarchy and presence of the owner. There is this sense of privilege, ownership of a project, a school, a concept, and a confidence in their body. It is the embodiment of ownness that scares me. As I tell my friends about my own complex, we also wonder about our old white women. One of my friends has heard something on Women's Hour on Radio 4 in the UK about the role of older women in society, about how in every species except for humans and killer whales, the females die when they're no longer fertile, rather than go through the menopause. Maybe this is something important to reflect on. If women are designed not to die but to transform, then maybe there is a special role or respect needed for these women. Even with my terms of ohm and ow, I know that one of my utopias for future community living and learning environments has people of all ages living together. However, I do not like hierarchies, where a younger person's voice is not heard. It is something that I've struggled with when we visited Tamera, a global eco-village community, which included a school in Portugal. They communicate and solve challenges using something called a forum, which is led by someone valued by the community who's lived there for 10 to 15 years. This frustrated me, and maybe I am too arrogant and impatient, and I think my voice is valid, and that I have the skills to hold a group. But I do not agree that only elders are able to hold spaces. I realise that it's not just my own and our complex that is an issue here, but is a deeper connection to power and control, or as the teacher and expert in democratic education, David Gribble, says, the real challenges of education are conformity and obedience, not just for students, but all of the adults involved in the system as well. And finally, Alys, the educator, speaks out. Who is Alys-we? My positionality posits me away from the others being regular teachers, often people like me who did well in school, but for some reason I just don't fit. The queering of Bad Alys justifies this, yet still I have entered a hierarchical career. How, when I thought I was an anarchist? Is there hope for me? For teaching? For education? I think the future is not teaching. Learning, yes, but not teaching. Mentoring and freedom for intrinsic self-autonomous learning, away from the narrow testing structures and lives deemed failures at such a young age. Alys-we peers through the looking glass, searching for beauty in calm learning environments, with adults that share life skills promoting democracy, free thinking and passion for life, and caring for each other. Innovative, flexible, practical thinkers, learning from Ken Robinson and bringing creativity back to the heart of learning, and timing nature to just be, to play at all ages, something that is inclusive and courageous, to meet all beings' needs, unpicking privileges of age, gender, sexuality, ability, ethnicity, not just stepping away, but revolutionising old thinking. It even questions current alternatives. For it is a spectrum of education, a radical, non-binary approach that draws on the current strengths, the gems, but dreams for the future, for the visions of the not yet thought, made possible by giving young people the freedom to fly, and to de-school teachers and de-school the system, and chuck out not just the word school, but the institution itself. For there is no ideal school. A school is not the answer. Thank you.